Greetings. My name is Luis Molina, and I'm the host of the Life Puro podcast. Today's guest is Jeremy Simien. Jeremy is an avid cigar smoker. He's also an art collector, and he's a historian of Louisiana Creole culture. We hope you find today's conversation insightful. So thanks for coming today, man.
Oh, I appreciate y'all having me.
Yeah.
And I love this new location. It is so chill, and it's so, well, it's just so refreshing to see a place dedicated to cigars and, in Baton Rouge. And I think it's on par with, locations anywhere in the United States is as good, as nice, and beautiful. So,
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're cigar nerds, so we really took a lot of time in the build out.
But I love that. I love that I can come here and totally not kind of feel intimidated and ask you all these questions, and you don't see any condescension. You see this kind of like passion, like, yeah, you know what? I'm like, what? And then I get excited. And we're excited, and we're smoking cigars. And we're excited, and I'm excited to come back.
Well, no, that's great hearing that. And I think a lot of that was because of my experiences when I first started smoking. I was 18. I was already like in it. And when I would travel the country, I would get the poor treatment, I guess, because the attendants assumed, oh, he's a young kid. He doesn't have money. I'm not going to spend time with him. So like, I remember that. And so I'm trying to do the opposite of being more welcoming, not having a, elitist attitude, whether you're a beginner or expert, we don't care. We'll talk cigars with you. So
I think that's the approach that anybody who's trying to share something has to have. So even as a person like me who's an antique dealer, antique collector, I shouldn't say dealer because I don't deal, but an antique collector and a historian, I think in the past there's always been this kind of pretentious, like, I collect antiques, I wear tweed, And,
there's an intimidation
factor,
yeah,
and it turns people off, and that's the last thing we need in order for to pass something on. We have to inspire people to take an interest, and we can't turn them off. And I think that's really what's happened in American antiques, and to a degree, some of our history is that we didn't engage. And when I say we, I don't mean me, but the generation before me did not engage with young people in a manner that was inviting. And so, it's one of those things. But we're going to try to fix that.
Yeah,
we're about to do a crossover.
Cigars,
history, material,
New
culture,
Orleans, everything.
New Orleans.
So
Louisiana,
with that, we'll start with cigars. So may I offer you
a please?
Yeah, a cigar there. So we got two choices.
Okay.
You can have them both, but so I was trying to think. What I like to do is try to match a cigar with my guest.
Okay.
Right. So I know that you're a big Fuente guy and a big Davidoff guy.
I am. Yep.
So the Casa Cuba is made by Fuente.
Okay.
So I figured you can smoke that or that or this next one. So the other one is a Tatuaje Black, and it's the Britannicus Extra. If you look at the shape, it's kind of a unique shape. It's kind of tapers slightly at the foot, so it's not a true Parejo, which Parejos are the straight-sided cigars. So this would be considered like a overall figurado, but they call this size a Britannicus Extra. Now the wrapper, the reason I chose this, the wrapper is a criollo wrapper.
Okay.
So in Spanish, criollo means Creole,
right,
or mix. So based on like the Creole art and history, I felt it was appropriate. We need a criollo cigar for
I think that makes sense. So we're going to smoke this.
Whatever you want.
I think.
Whatever.
Maybe
we'll do that one.
On
I know, but I don't remember if you like Tatuaje or if you smoked
I do like
it.
Tatuaje.
Okay.
I've had some great ones. I've never had a bad one, but I remember. I don't remember exactly which one, but I remember y'all turned me on to them the first time I ever tried it, and I was like, "What was that one?" They're like, "Y'all like, oh, that one was limited, man. You're just gonna have to." Like that's the only bad thing. It's like you get excited about some of these, limited runs or whatever, and then you go looking for them and they're gone with them.
I know.
But oh well, that's what makes it exciting. You're chasing that next one, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
So after you, we got the cigar cutter and lighter.
Okay.
So we'll get on with the cigar prepping right now before we jump in. Yeah, so that's the double blade cutter from Wiesel. We like this one.
Yeah, that was a very smooth cut.
All right, and here's your lighter. This is
man.
a Colibri. So you just it's kind of cool. You just push it right here. It's a triple.
See, I would
table
injure
top.
myself with something like this.
I know.
I gotta keep it real simple. and antiquated.
Or if you want the matches, we got that too. So
no,
however you want to do
man,
it.
not that simple.
Yeah.
I fight with matches too. So let's see.
Yeah, I think I'll do the matches because I do like a torch lighter when I'm outside, but if it were my choice, I'd kind of go old school.
I think there's advantages to soft flame, right?
Right, for sure.
That's pretty nice.
So yeah, I think don't quote me now. I gotta look up. I believe that this Tatuaje Black label, this particular size was like a limited offering. So talking about, I know,
He tells me
I
that
know,
in case I love it.
I know.
It's like, yeah, but you might be able to find it again.
We try to specify that to our customers when we offer them a cigar like that. Like, look, if you like it, we're not trying to upsell you. Just know that it's a limited run.
Load up,
so
man.
Load up now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I get
Because
that.
we've seen it where just like you described, people fall in love with a particular cigar and I can't get it. It was a limited edition.
It's gone.
I know.
It's like, I understand that.
So yeah, just hope you enjoy the cigar. Yeah, Tatuaje is one of my personal favorite companies. I'm definitely a geek when it comes to the company. But anyway, so enjoy the cigar. We'll go back to your thoughts on that a little later, but let's just jump right in. So you mentioned Creole. You're a historian.
Yes.
What can you tell me about the Creole life? What does that mean for people, especially who don't live
in
here?
Louisiana? So the word Creole, I did a video on it recently, and it's a complicated and contested word. But in the context that I'll be using mostly tonight, we're going to be talking about Louisiana Creoles. And when I'm referring to Creoles, I'm not necessarily referring to the race of the individual, but I'm referring to their colonial roots in Louisiana. So you mentioned that Criollo rapper, okay, obviously that's Spanish, and I think the original word was Portuguese and came from crier, which means something that is created. So something that's not indigenous, but something that was made.
Okay.
So in a colonial setting, a colonial place like Colonial, Louisiana, or Saint Domingue, which is, present-day Haiti or somewhere like that, a Creole is something that was not indigenous, but was made or born there. So a horse born in the colony, that's a Creole horse.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and an indigenous person and their offspring with a person who had come from either another colony or from the mainland, that child was a Creole because it was something created there. Even though it had indigenous parts, it was something new as an act of fusion. So that's what we're talking about. When I say the word Creole, I'm typically referring to Louisiana Creoles because the word is used all over. And sometimes the word is even derogatory. In certain places, it's my understanding, in Brazil, it's not a great word to be called a Creole. Some people would take offense to that. And
so it's more of a racial epithet for some?
It can be. And I would imagine, like everything, it depends who's saying and how they're saying it. Just kind of like in Spanish, formal you versus, tu or something.
Usted, the formal versus tu, the informal you.
Right, which can be taken as high-handed or something like that. And so can an imposed racial or, I guess, I won't say, well, yeah, I'll say a cultural identity. An imposed cultural identity can also be something that's offensive. But when I talk about Creoles, a lot of times I am referring to these so-called Creoles of color. And these Creoles of color are people of mixed African ancestry who have colonial roots in Louisiana. And these people, the varying degrees, some have, almost complete African ancestry, 90%, 95%, 100%, whatever. Some have very little because of mixture, 5%, whatever.
Yeah.
But what they have is this shared fusion of culture, and that is what Creole is. And that is a culmination of these people coming together, sometimes not always by choice. There was forced immigration here, as we know, because of the transatlantic slave trade, in other exiles, the Acadians. But this cultural fusion is known as Creole. So we see the indigenous people, we see the Africans living in close proximity we see the Acadians and we see these Europeans pouring in. And that culture that they made, that language that they began to speak, took on certain words that were indigenous in origin, and that is Creole.
Okay. So, because I remember hearing years ago, and I guess the word Creole, it just depends what you're talking about, but I understood it to be, I thought it was African American primarily. But then I heard someone that told me that the original Creole, if there is such a thing, was the descendant or offspring of the Spanish and French that came over here in Louisiana. Is that right? Is there truth to that, or is that
there's some truth that is written in books, and that is written in the end of the 19th century when a lot of revisionist history came about, and but I think the consensus would be today that a Creole is a self-identified person with colonial roots in Louisiana.
Okay.
So if you have ancestry here pre-1803, pre-Louisiana Purchase, I would say that you were Creole. Creoles typically were Catholic, typically French-speaking, and the reason is not just because they happen to be, it's because that's who was allowed into the colony. Originally, you had to be Catholic. Even enslaved people were required to be baptized. And French was the primary language. Even when the Spanish came, which they controlled Louisiana from, 1763 to about 1803 when the sale took place. They always make a joke, historians say that the children of the Spanish never spoke a word of Spanish. They quickly assimilated into this greater Creole, but more French Creole world.
Yeah. So with the Louisiana Creoles, I think of, when I hear Creole, I grew up in Metairie, I think about like in New Orleans, right? There's a Creole.
7th Ward.
Yeah,
that area.
But when I moved to Baton Rouge, I quickly learned there are other Creoles, like in a parish right west of here. I'll not forget.
Sure, Point Capee.
Yeah, Point Capee.
So there's Point Capee, there's St. Landry Parish, and there's Natchitoches. So what these were agricultural outposts. So when we look at the history of Louisiana, obviously Natchitoches was established earliest, and then New Orleans, and then we have kind of the St. Landry Parish, the Opelousas, and all of that. And those were areas where I call the country Creoles or the prairie Creoles. These people were agricultural based. These would have been plantations. It's a dirty word, and it doesn't always mean enslaved workers, but rather a place where things are grown, agricultural based. And that would have been where they were doing most of that. New Orleans was the city.
Okay.
So many of these people who were in St. Landry Parish, in Opelousas, like some of my family, would have worked, and then taken a very nice vacation during the social season, which would have been the end of the growing season if you were in sugarcane or whatever. And you would have gone Christmas, then you would have celebrated New Year's, and then, of course, Mardi Gras. And you would have if you were free and able, you would have rented rooms in New Orleans, and that's when you would have done your shopping. That's when you would have done your socializing with your city cousins. Probably where you would have learned a little more about fine tobaccos instead of that funky stuff you were growing back home, smoking in pipes. And that's where you would have conducted trade. So, hey, look, I'm selling my crop. This is what I need to do here and here. This is where you would have bought new things. So all of these people were connected. All of these people essentially were related. I think if you have colonial roots in Louisiana, chances are you are interconnected by high probability.
Yeah, there are a lot of family names that are very common within the Creole.
Allied families, yeah.
Allied family?
That's what they call allied families. You see the same 4 or 5 family names in 18th century, and that's for Creoles of color and white Creoles, and so.
Yeah, I always found it fascinating, just the whole history. So I remember, have you ever read the book Lafitte by, I think the author's name was Lyle Saxon?
Did you hear that eye roll? No, I haven't, but I have my own thoughts on Lyle Saxon, but I want to hear what you're talking about.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to learn about that, but so I bring that up because I remember there was an excerpt where they would talk about Lafitte and his brother attending these balls. I think they were called Quadrant Balls.
Yeah.
So, but they made it seem like, to me, and maybe I misinterpreted, but it was like an elegant, like high social, like scene, and it was an honor to be there. Can you give me insight into that?
I can totally give you insight into that. So the approach today and the perspective today by most serious historians is that Quadrant Balls did not actually happen in the way that they are presented. So, Creoles of color, these are the people of mixed ancestry. If we look at most of the writings of the early 20th century or late 19th century, I mentioned this a little earlier, we had a lot of interlopers and we had a lot of Anglos who came to Louisiana and sensationalized things such as this thing called plissage or Quadrant Balls. And basically they pitched Quadrant Balls as like a meat market where eligible white suitors could go and pick out women of color. But there's a couple of misconceptions about that because, right, so they would find a woman of color and they would set up a deal supposedly with her mother and then set her up in a shop or in a house in the Marigny. That's what they claim, but it doesn't really make sense. And I'll tell you why it doesn't make sense. We know for a fact that there was the existence of these people called free men of color. They are rarely written about in these historical accounts, but they are found all over in actual historical archives. We're going to probably talk about one today who is a very successful cigar merchant, Georges Alces or Alces, I don't know what the actual pronunciation of the last name was.
Yeah,
but free man of color, okay, eligible man who was up there with anybody in the city. And there were other men. There was a gentleman named Philippe Lecoste, who was one of the richest men in the city, real estate developers. There's the Soulis. There's all of these really just amazing figures who were able to do all these incredible things. I mean, these free men of colors were mathematicians. They were doctors, Dr. Charles Rounet. We see all of these men occupying just top tier positions. So why would they auction off their daughters, their sisters to white men at this Quadrant Ball? They wouldn't.
Yeah.
But you never hear about free men of color, and you always hear, oh, they were sent to France and they disappeared, and then presumably all women of color who had relationships with white men had girls, and so it's part of this narrative that is made to. I know this is dark. This kind of deep conversation.
Yeah.
I was trying to smoke a cigar.
Yeah, I know.
But all of these narratives are really an attempt to kind of belittle the achievements of these free people of color, and it was out of racism. And Lyle Saxon is particularly guilty of this. He and his partner, Francois Mignon, whose name is really not Francois Mignon, the guy was not French at all, lived at Melrose Plantation in Natchitoches. And Melrose Plantation was owned by a family of color called the Metoyer or the Metoyers. And so they were landowners and prominent in sugarcane, owned shops in New Orleans. Unfortunately, they had some trouble after the 1837, basically a recession, 1837, real estate bubble. But it's ironic because they actually set up shop there during this kind of WPA era and it wrote a lot of bad stuff. And, just a lot of it's been dismissed. And it's entertaining and it's interesting, but it reads like Gone with the Wind. I mean, it looks
like
good
glorifying the antebellum
exactly
thing when it has its dark.
Fabulous New Orleans. Let's not look at the dark, the shackles over there. Let's not look at the reality of the situation. So, I mean, but whatever it is what it is. But yes, we're still fighting with these narratives that are complicated and problematic that try to overshadow the achievements of these people, and their achievements were significant and really fascinating.
I had no clue about that. So, I mean, for me, and I'm sure most people, we want to know what the real history is, right? And so, man, it's really eye-opening. But see, I've always, grown up in New Orleans, knew that there were significant contributors from the Creole society, the group, for New Orleans. But I guess it's not really emphasized even today, or?
I think it's not emphasized because the word Creole too took on a negative stigma, and it's associated with colorism in the Black community. And I think the word is kind of fell out of fashion after the Civil Rights Movement, the second Civil Rights Movement, because the first Civil Rights Movement happened in New Orleans, and it was started by Creoles of color. And this was, of course, what would become Plessy versus Ferguson. This is the Économie des Citoyens, this group who basically kicked up. And I'm sorry if this is too much depth.
No,
guys.
No, I like hearing it.
But the first civil right, or an early, I shouldn't say the first because I don't want to trivialize the successful civil rights movement. But the earliest efforts at civil rights occurred in New Orleans, Louisiana, and were led by men of color, previously free men of color, after Reconstruction, the foiling of Reconstruction. And the Reconstruction was that 13-year period after the Civil War where they said, we're going to make everything great again. Sorry, that wasn't a dig at Trump for any of y'all about to turn off. But what it was this period that was supposed to introduce this utopian new era where the black man would have equality, and we had this government comprised of people of color, people of African descent, and white people. And it was working for a while. And then the federal government decided to eventually remove federal troops out of New Orleans, and it went to hell after that. And the former Confederates took over the city again, and this is when these Confederate monuments were erected after the foiling of Civil War. So even an image I have in this box of a cigar roller, a guy named George Ray. His father was actually the captain of the Metropolitan Police during Reconstruction, and he was a free black man. And what's interesting about George and cigars is George is one of these guys who came. His family actually was from Saint Domingue, which is modern-day Haiti, but they made a pit stop in Cuba for a period of time, which a lot of families from Saint Domingue did. The Spanish got a little paranoid after the Louisiana Purchase, and pretty much they kind of asked these people, come on, y'all need to go ahead and leave. So around 1808, 1809, we had another influx of people from Cuba who were leftover refugees from Saint Domingue, and the Rays were some of those people. So this family came over, and they were politically active. They were really interesting people involved in Creole society. And anyway, grandson of Bartholomew Ray, a guy named George Ray, was a cigar roller, and he actually left New Orleans to go to Wisconsin. I know.
Yeah, what was the motivation for that?
Well, I was like, what the hell is going on in Milwaukee and Wisconsin? Major cigar industry in the 1880s and 1890s, 500 plus factories. I had no idea about this, and I didn't understand it. But I bought a collection of about 40 photos of people all from the 7th Ward and Tremé, and they're all Creoles of color, and they all stayed in Milwaukee. Now, George would return with his wife, Anita, back to St. Anne Street and live out the rest of his days. I don't believe he had any children in New Orleans, but we do see this Creole population. So you say, well, we don't see a lot of these people talking today. A lot of these people were dispersed, and they left with this great migration. Some of that was to do with cigars.
What?
They went to Ybor City.
I was going to ask if there's a connection to Tampa.
Yes. And so I acquired a bed recently by a free man of color named Dutre Barjon. He also was from Saint Domingue. He was known as the Candyman of New Orleans, not the horror movie creepy Candyman, but because he made just beautiful furniture that looked sweet and just delicious. And he was a free man of color, made some of the best beds, the best armoires, all this stuff that everybody really wanted in their house. And he was from Saint Domingue. Well, anyway, his children, though, did inherit the business, but of course, after the Civil War, there wasn't as much of a demand for this very expensive furniture, and people began to take on more practical jobs, such as cigar rolling, right? And we know George Assis, I think, had several hundred Creoles of color working in his cigar factory on North Rampart, was it? Or Rampart
I
Street.
don't remember, where his factory is located.
I have a picture of that. If we could maybe add that in later. See,
it's
a beautiful building.
Yeah, we'll put it in.
And some of them were these Barjons that were cigar rollers, and I was doing research on this bed I bought, and I found out that he had living descendants. I actually missed one who was 90-some years old, still living in the Tampa area, and they had all moved there, 2 or 3 of his children, for the cigar industry. And, of course, they had assimilated into Latin culture, which is not such a stretch when you're coming from Santa Mang. You maybe made a pit stop in Cuba. And we look at Cuba and we look at these places, they have Afro influences in the music and the food and everything. So it's very similar. I mean, Louisiana is Cuba, or was Cuba, except for it was acquired by the United States and, had a little French flair to it. So
I like the saying that New Orleans is considered the northernmost Caribbean city.
True. It's true, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There are elements of truth to that.
Yeah. I mean, when you walk, and I don't, not to get too sci-fi or whatever, but I feel like when you walk the streets of New Orleans, you'll hear a phantom drum. You'll hear a drum in the distance. You don't know if that's a guy really just knocking on that drum trying to get that little $8 or $5, whatever he's trying to get, or if that's, a ghost from beyond. I feel like the city's so dense still with so much history and it's obviously very haunted,
right,
if you will, but it's also just haunted with history.
Are you into that?
I try not to be into that because it kind of scares me. But I also try to be into that, so I'm not so scared.
Yeah.
My wife likes that stuff. And when we first started dating, we went to the Myrtles Plantation and all of this, which was one of these haunted places. And we've gone to several haunted tours in New Orleans. But yeah, I find it fascinating. I do believe somewhat in it. Yeah.
Yeah. What's scary? What's one of the scary stories you remember or haunted stories?
Oh, I don't
New
know.
Orleans.
In New Orleans, I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of weird stuff that's happened, tragic and crazy stuff. I'm not gonna really. I won't share my own personal ghost stories, but I do believe that I do believe the end.
Have you ever had a?
I have
supernatural.
Yeah, but this is a cigar, not whiskey.
Yeah.
So. So.
Well said.
Maybe next podcast.
So we had a guest on our first episode, Greyhawk, who he kind of divulged some of like his practice in I guess the other world. It was pretty cool. Very interesting character. So, but anyway, so kind of talking back to the Creole life, and look, you can not answer if you don't want, but like, what do you think of Anne Rice's depiction, like in the interview with the vampire? I don't know if they really kind of focus on Creole culture.
Sure.
But I don't know. I just found it very fascinating, her depiction of like New Orleans way back when.
Are we referring to the recent TV show?
Both.
Okay,
Let's
so
because I saw both. Yeah.
I like Anne Rice. I know she's passed now. I like her work, and I like the original movie, even though it had Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise in it. But you actually forget that in about 3 minutes because I think the story was so compelling and the characters were so well written that you forget who you're watching and you become engulfed in it. I liked the new show a lot.
I do too.
I found it interesting, and especially that there was a twist that was taking place kind of in that Storyville era and Jim Crow, but it's Jim Crow era New Orleans, which is segregated, strange, dark times after the Civil War. And I found that interesting, and I found that approach interesting. I think Anne Rice tried her best to be historically accurate. She wrote a book called The Feast of All Saints, which talked about Creoles of color and talked about and touched on some of these stereotypes. But I think that her intentions are pure, but she referred to used these books from the end of the 19th century and early 20th century as sources, and a lot of those are filled with bad information. But I think her intentions were pure, and at the end of the day, she writes about vampires. So I mean, it's about vampires. It's entertainment, so it's fine. I like Anne Rice. So
yeah, there's supposed to be a little suspension of disbelief here.
Yeah. Just stretch it a little bit. I mean, look, if Louis can fly, whatever. Two men like that could walk into an opera house, and the black guy wouldn't get escorted out. Whatever. Okay, so I'll suspend that.
Man, you're talking about the New Orleans, the French Opera House.
Yeah.
Man, I wish that structure was around.
It's beautiful.
And what happened? It got burnt in a fire.
It burned, I believe. Right. I don't remember exactly when. Maybe in late teens, 1918 or so.
Yeah.
Actually, let me just open this box.
Let's
just
go to
open
the
this box of goodies. First of all, you wrote a little bit about this. I'm bumping into microphones here. About this company before, right?
Oh yeah, the Belle Creole from Simon Hernsheim.
Yes, exactly. Yep. And so let's open this up.
Here, I'll let you.
Oh, it's all right. Nothing is too fragile. So here we go. We know this.
Yeah.
But speaking of Creoles,
so people who don't know, Simon Hernsheim, and I know a little bit about this because I co-wrote an article in Where You At in January of 2007 about the cigar history in New Orleans, over 100 years ago. And Simon Hernsheim was the biggest manufacturer. In fact, at one point in the 1890s, he was credited with producing the most cigars.
Wow.
And this is his famous brand, La Belle Creole. So we'll get a better shot.
Beautiful label.
Editing.
I love that label.
Yeah. So the Creole Belle.
Right.
So do you have any insights into this brand?
I mean,
or any of the story, any anecdotes about it? Yeah, just looking at the box art, very traditional.
I think it was definitely, marketing to the idea of these beautiful Creoles. And I'm not necessarily sure that this is supposed to be a Creole of color. Again, this term was used widely also by this kind of aristocratic white society with French and Spanish and sometimes some even black blood that they didn't talk about. So, but yeah, I love the brand and I love the design. I've seen this so many times. I was happy to find this box.
Yeah. No, and I love just the very traditional artwork.
There's an inscription I couldn't make out either. It says something.
Let's see.
I attributed that to a date. I think but I don't know if they put marbles in there or something.
Yeah, I can't even read that. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, a lot of people passed down these old cigar boxes.
Yeah.
They made good little storage pieces.
Could have been grandpa's socks in these. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Right. I know. It could be anything.
So let's open the mystery bit. Let's see what's going on here.
What's next in here?
So let's see.
Ooh, little perique.
A little perique. Open that up, man. You got to smell it.
Wait, I think I remember this. Okay, so for people who don't know, perique is a tobacco grown in Louisiana, in St. James Parish. It's actually considered what we call a condiment tobacco. So you really wouldn't want to smoke this straight. It's too pungent. Let me smell. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, so you would treat it like salt or pepper in a dish. So it was used primarily in the pipe tobacco world. It's been used in cigarettes. What was that old brand?
Well,
Picayune cigarettes.
Picayune, and now in American Spirits, I think they use it, right?
So they saved, just to give insight for people. Oh, I remember this company. Yeah, this was a while ago. River Road Tobacco. That's cool. Well, thank you for bringing that. This brings up memories. Yeah, I don't think they're made anymore, but
I couldn't find any more, but I snatched them up when I found them. And so we have some other kind of just interesting cigar stuff. We're talking about Opera House, right?
Oh, cool.
So this is Adele, actually Adelina Patti, who is a really well-known opera singer, and she frequented the French Opera House. Speaking of which, let's see what else we got in here.
That's cool. So what box would that have?
So this said, let me make sure I'm telling the truth.
I'm sure it's
Little
tobacco related,
cigars.
correct? Okay.
Smoke these cigars. I'm not sure. This is in offering this cigar to the smoking public. We ask special attention to its unrivaled quality, and we beg to assure them that it is beyond doubt the finest 5-cent smoke ever presented for their favor.
Wow,
well, that's a hell of a sell, man.
I know.
Great care has there's more. Great care has been taken in its preparation, and no pains have been spared to make it a royal 5-cent smoke. Purchasers, to avoid buying imitations, will notice that each box has on it factory number 1000. They were worried about fakes even back then. 3rd District, New York.
That's cool.
So, but that was, I think, found in New Orleans.
What this country needs is a good 5-cent cigar.
Exactly.
I forgot who said that. I forget.
Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens.
I felt it was a politician, but I could be wrong.
Could be.
One of those famous cigar store kind of anecdotes. Smoke opera. That's very cool. And yeah, I forgot to mention, I saw the tax stamp on the bottom of this box. It said factory number 511. Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if they actually chronologically attributed the amount of factories, with how many factories there were in the city at the time.
But that's a lead.
Yeah. And it could be. I mean, there were literally hundreds of cigar factories at one point, and a factory could have just been a 1-person operation, so that would classify as a factory.
So they were all these huge buildings, 5-story buildings. So we were talking about the French Opera House.
Oh, cool.
So this is Old French Opera House, corner of Bourbon and Toulouse Street. This and it goes on to talk about between the acts, little cigars, all tobacco, no paper. So this is that quick. This is that nub before the nub.
Yeah.
Your little quick smoke, like, oh, damn, I really hate this opera. Let me hurry up and get a little something, and then get back to it. So I love that.
That's cool.
So that's another little cool piece of New Orleans tobacco history.
So I've heard of that. The Between the Acts, is that the name of the brand or the size? Because I feel like I've heard that term in our industry over the years. So maybe it's to differentiate those smaller format cigars.
Right. So I'm not sure if that is the brand or something that they used as a kind of like a calling of small cigars.
Yeah.
It does say factory number 98. So again, there's that factory number, and something else kind of blocked out. And also it mentions Adelina Patti made her American debut at the Royal at the French Opera House, and she was a big deal. And there's a recording of her.
Wow.
Unfortunately, it's in her later years, but still a beautiful voice.
So these cigars were made in New York, but it was promoting the French Opera House in New Orleans,
right? And promoting her especially. So yeah, and I think a lot of some of this stuff was shipped to New York because well, speaking of New York, here we go. So George Houses had factories supposedly in New York as well. Now, like you were saying, the definition of factory, I don't think necessarily meant the modern equivalent of a Manhattan skyscraper. It could have been 3 guys boxing cigars, and that was a factory, or distributing, or doing some aspect of that.
Yeah.
But this is a Victorian cabinet card, so probably 1880s, and it's George Houses, and it's New Orleans, and on the back there's more. Take a look.
Yeah, that's cool. So what do you mean Victorian cabinet card?
Oh,
what is that?
I should say, I said cabinet card. I should say advertising card. They're essentially like larger format business cards.
Oh, what?
Okay, and
that was a thing?
Yeah, and a cabinet card is actually, these are cabinet cards. They call them cabinet cards there, and I keep hitting the microphone. Sorry. These are cabinet cards, and these are pictures. And this was taken off Frenchman Street. This is one of the most bizarre ones I have. I have hundreds of these. I collect New Orleans photographs, and these guys are obviously, they're in the industry. Okay.
Yeah.
This is what industry we don't know. I think they definitely serve drinks and gamble, and one smoking a cool cigar.
Yeah, they look like they were getting in trouble.
They were up to something. I would
see
love
the gun
to.
and the alcohol.
And on Frenchman Street, right there, you knew there was stuff going on. Yeah. Dallier is a famous photographer. And then this is George Ray, and he's smoking a cigar in this.
Oh yeah.
And this is the gentleman who was born in New Orleans, whose family had come from Saint Domingue. And his father was actually the captain of the Metropolitan Police during Reconstruction. Some things happened, didn't work out. I'll let y'all Google it. It's fascinating. But so he went to Wisconsin to join his first cousin in cigar rolling. But he did end up coming back to New Orleans and lived the rest of his days on St. Anne Street.
Okay. Right in the heart of the quarter? Not St. Anne, outside the quarter?
I think it's outside. It would have been more outside Marigny.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken. But yeah.
That's cool. Man, look at that fur.
They were doing okay.
Yeah.
Right? But you could tell they had moved up, somewhere cold. That wasn't New Orleans. But I love the cigar. Remember we discussed this where it's kind of, is that a figurado shape, or what were the classic shapes that we would have seen?
So back then, what we would call the double perfecto, where it basically tapers on both ends.
Okay.
Right? So it looks like a little, I don't know how to describe it, almost like an eye.
Yeah.
Like the shape of an eye. That was one of the most popular formats back then. And they were small. So a lot of people, supposedly 4 out of 5 men smoked cigars in what we call the golden age, which would have been about 1880 up until like 1920, 1930. And 4 out of 5, 80% of men smoked cigars. So it was a big, it was a big deal back then. So, people talk about the cigar boom of the 90s and this resurgence lately, like the last few years, especially with the pandemic. Still, the golden age killed it in terms of cigars produced and people smoking and enjoying cigars.
Especially versus cigarettes. So I did do a little research earlier, and I saw that where they were like, half what was it, the numbers? I think like 500 million or something cigarettes made, but 6 billion cigars worldwide. So that was pretty tremendous too. And I pulled some, I don't have to get too much into this, but just some of those interesting. Yeah. So in 1880, there was 500 million cigars consumed versus 500 million cigarettes consumed in 1880. 6 billion cigars.
Yeah. That's why I kind of laugh when these reports come out every year, like, oh, we broke import numbers. Well, maybe that's the import, but like cigars consumed, especially during the golden age, far exceeded those import numbers today.
Right.
And a lot of them were domestically produced, right? You literally had dozens, if not hundreds, of cigar factories in most major cities.
Right.
And cities that you wouldn't even think about, like places in Wisconsin or Ohio, Illinois,
Right.
just all over. I mean, it was all over the country.
Right. And I think it's interesting because it's kind of like, I think there's obviously a culture with cigars now, but I think too, New Orleans, the culture in New Orleans lent itself to loving cigars, kind of being bon vivants, loving beautiful things.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that came with kind of the high mortality rate. I mean, always, hurricanes, yellow fever, bad stuff. So they lived life to the fullest. And I think a good cigar was something to look forward to in the morning, afternoon, and evening. And just like a good cigar was something to look forward to, the next day with your coffee. I think, these people love that life. And I think that was their joy de vivre,
Yeah,
So.
for sure. No, I think that's definitely relevant, especially times, even today, right? People who enjoy cigars, they usually work hard or have a lot of stress. This is a good respite, even if it's temporary, it's an affordable, attainable luxury.
Right.
I can see why it was popular back then and even today, but
Lifestyle
awesome.
accessory.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a lifestyle accessory because I think a lot of people too smoke today because of these ideas of the past, of a different. They say a simpler time, much more complicated in some ways, but also simpler in the sense of a man would just be able to light up a cigar and enjoy it at a train station, which obviously today you're going to have a problem lighting up a cigar at a lot of places. But I do believe that a place like New Orleans, which has historical ties to cigars, and Louisiana in general, I mean, even these Indians, I mean, the Native Americans, these Choctaw, Chickasaw, they were dealing with tobacco. I think there should be cigar districts where you should be allowed to smoke this in homage. Sorry, is that far? Is that crazy?
No, I like that. No, I love that.
Because
Cigar
I think
district.
it makes sense.
Right. Well, Ybor City really treasures their cigar history, and you see that culture definitely put on a pedestal there. So I think that's pretty cool, and it seems the town of Tampa really gets behind that. So I would love to see that in New Orleans, especially with our history of cigar production.
I think it would make sense. In fact, the last great painting I found, I collect paintings, is I'm not sure if you know that, but was in Tampa area. It was a portrait painting of a woman, painted in 1852 New Orleans, and it had ended up there. And my speculation was that this is probably the ancestor of somebody who moved turn of the century in that area, from Louisiana to Tampa and all that. She's back in Louisiana now. I've had it restored and everything, but and that's what a lot of what I do is I do a lot of learning through material culture, but I do a lot of sharing through material culture. Yeah.
And I love that, especially with your Instagram profile is awesome with the pictures that you share. Can we get into that about the art, the art collecting? Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So, if you want to talk about and I'm probably butchering the name, so please correct me. The Belle painting. Can you want to shed some light on that? Because I thought that was really, really intriguing.
So the Belle painting is a really interesting painting that I became aware of about probably probably a little over 10 years ago. And it was a painting that was given to the New Orleans Museum of Art, I think around 1972, and they deaccessioned it.
What does that mean?
That is a fancy word for they decided to sell it. They didn't need it. Museums do that. I think a lot of people make this or believe that grandma's favorite silverware, favorite dress, favorite bed, cigar humidor will be safe at a museum. Not necessarily. What? Museums do get rid of stuff for funding, and they decided to get rid of this painting. And the painting appeared it's a portrait of 3 children. Okay. Of course, there was a shadow in the background, but it was a picture of 3 children. Later on, we would find out that there was actually 4 children. One of them was there was 3 white children and a black enslaved boy who we would identify, thanks to myself and a researcher, as Belisaire. So this painting, it always stayed in my mind since I first saw it, and I'd been looking for it for a very long time. And I was on the New Orleans Museum of Art a sessions board. Sessions is when you buy things, right?
Okay.
And I got a lead thanks to Instagram.
Wow.
I talked about this, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, I saw that painting a little while ago." I said, "What do you mean? How long ago?" 10 years ago. I said, "Well, look, I need to find it, man." He's like, "It was 10 years ago." I was like, "That's okay." So long story short, it took me a little while, but I was able to contact the person who had acquired it. I was hoping that it would end up in the New Orleans Museum of Art. For whatever reason, they were not interested. I think they weren't interested because it was kind of embarrassing, the situation about this. I mean, there's more on that coming out later, but in short, they did not want to acquire it, so I acquired it. I wasn't planning on spending that much money on a Wednesday, but sometimes you just have to do it. So I got the painting, and I broke out in a sweat because I'm like, we got to find out more about this. At this time, we didn't know who any of the people were in the picture. The boy Belisaire had been uncovered in a previous restoration, but there still needed to be work. So we had it reconserved, which is where your painting is brought to a conservator's studio, and through the use of solvents, they remove grime, funk, old varnish, and in this case, touch-up paint that was used to cover over this boy. And so we had to figure out who this boy was, who the other two children, or who the other boy was, and the other two children were, and we were able to do that because we had a breakthrough when I found a 1972 Picayune article where the woman talks about donating it to the New Orleans Museum of Art. She even talks about there's an enslaved boy covered over.
She said that?
She said that. It's in the files.
So she knew that Belisaire was covered.
She didn't know his name. She didn't know his name, but she knew that there was an enslaved boy who was covered over. And it was kind of funny because she didn't know who her own relatives were in there either. They had kind of forgotten by 1972 who this was. They knew they were relatives, but we were able to pretty easily, I shouldn't say pretty easily, but quickly find that out once we were able to confirm it had descended in this lady's family. So in short, New Orleans Museum of Art never displayed it. They kept it in a basement, 72, 82, 92, till about 2000, and I want to say 4. I don't have my dates on right now. And they sold it at Christie's. Christie's didn't really do what they should have done, in my opinion, which was, scratched away. It looked a little more into this because it was clearly expressed in the museum files that there was an enslaved boy. And in short, now the world knows about Belisaire. He was on cover of the Picayune, which is a big deal. I mean, this is a newspaper that historically used to run runaway slave ads. So to see that a boy named Belisaire is now being celebrated on the cover of the newspaper is a big deal. And he was on the Advocate cover, and he was on the cover of Antique Magazine. And I recently went to the New York Winter Show, Antique Show, and talked a little bit about him. And so it's been amazing to be able to share that story and give insight. And there's potentially a forthcoming little mini documentary coming out about that. So,
oh, cool. So that's in the works, if you can talk about it.
It's in the works. I mean, yeah.
Cool.
So I'm excited about that. And I participated in a podcast on it too for Curious Objects at the Magazine Antiques. There's that plug right there.
Yeah, that's cool.
Drop that right there. So
well, that's cool. So do we know, or do you know now who these 3 children were plus Belisaire? What's the story with them?
So the story is really not as pleasant as we would like. We know that all of those children died before adulthood, and that Belisaire was the only one to live to be an adult. Unfortunately, the painting was painted in 1837. In 1856, Christmas Eve, he was sold to a gentleman named Lezan Becknell. And Lezan Becknell had a plantation, which is in St. John, which is Evergreen Plantation. And it's the most intact plantation. You've seen it in such movies as Django and a bunch of movies. It's one of those well-known. And Belisaire was enslaved there, and we don't know what happened to him after, I believe, 1861. We don't know. I'm hopeful that he was able to live until the end of the Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation, and it's ongoing research. We're hoping something will turn up, but it's kind of sad because we know that he was born in New Orleans, and interesting enough, he was born in the household of a Spanish guy, a Trevino, who was in the city. So we had again that Spanish connection in New Orleans is deep, and he was born in the French Quarter. But I would love to know what happened to him, and we still don't know.
So it's a lot of detective work that goes on in your world.
A lot of detective work. Yep.
So like, what kind of resources? I mean, do you start with Google? Like, how do you try to find this information?
Well, with this was really put me to a bunch of. I mean, I really had to kind of stretch out. I had to hire somebody to assist with this, to do archival work. But like I said, the biggest breakthrough was finding that 1972 Picayune article, because we knew the family who had donated it, but we had no idea if they didn't just buy it off the side of the road. When we found out it had descended in her maternal line, that is to say her mother's line, we were able to say, oh, well, we know who she is. Let's look who her mother is. Okay, well, where were they in 1830? That's when this painting was made. We said, well, they're right here. They're at the Montleon Hotel, except for it wasn't a Montleon Hotel. It was a 3-story, brand spanking new, beautiful townhouse. And so the side of the Montleon Hotel is where Belisaire lived. Funny enough, I drank a few cocktails for Belisaire at the Montleon and then stumbled my way to the Ogden Museum for a champagne toast where it was on display there.
Oh, cool.
And so that was kind of one of those monumental moments. I'm fondling a book at the Montleon Hotel and, give me another one. One of these was a very, I'm sure the tourists were like, man, this place is so weird. New Orleans is great, full of eccentrics.
Yeah.
And I was having a real moment there.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So, yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that show on PBS. What is it, Finding Your Roots?
Okay, yeah.
Like, just the amount, like, to me, what's amazing is how do these guys, like, find this information on a person and their family, and especially if, like, the person they're, who's the subject, they don't really have any paperwork or anything. They don't know their family line,
Right. I mean, we're lucky in Louisiana that a lot of records were made and kept. And a lot of that was because of the Catholic Church, as far as births, deaths, and of course, people were quite litigious back then, so they would sue their own mother for literally, in a cashless society, people were always borrowing money. So we have a lot of records of people, suing people, but we were able to get a lot of information from that. So we were able to realize through some of this family, the Frey family's problems, financial problems, they actually lost possession of property. Back then, property was enslaved people. So Belisaire and his mother actually went on the auction block. But the family was able to go over there and get them back for a time before they would eventually have to sell Belisaire. And someone has said, and it was kind of funny, that this gentleman, Frederick Frey, who was the owner of Belisaire, and the children who are in the portrait are his children, the white children, was like the antebellum Bernie Madoff. He owed money to everybody, and just was like constantly moving money. And I'm not sure if that's a fair characterization. I'm sure if I was a descendant, I probably wouldn't love that.
Yeah.
But it makes for a hell of a Netflix zinger.
Yeah.
Antebellum, Bernie Madoff, consigns, or whatever.
I'm intrigued. Yeah.
Yeah, it's intriguing. Netflix, call me. What the fuck?
Yeah.
What took so long? I'm waiting for y'all.
Well, we'll hope that our 2 viewers will help promote this,
man. That's good. Dude, I'm cheap. You just got to bring me your dinner and give me a cigar, man, and I will talk. Yeah. Just wind me up. That's it. Right.
So going back to the world of art collecting.
Sure.
So what's you've kind of conveyed it, but what are some of your motivations for art collecting? I mean, is it purely commercial game? Is it historical preservation? Is it a combination of both? I mean, I didn't really even realize that museums are a business, right? That they will unload some of their stock, for whatever reason. What are your motivations for art collecting?
Well, one of my motivations and what really started me was a lack of representation of what I felt was my family history, and some of that were the free Creoles of color, and some of that were enslaved Creoles and enslaved people of color. And I felt like at a time when I began really getting serious about this around 2013, I didn't see any sort of reflection of this important history. Now, everybody's, they woke up, they're woke AF, right? Some of them you wish would just go back to sleep because they don't know what they're talking about. But I'm being mean, but I'm also kind of being comical about it. But you have a lot of museums now who are just trying to catch on to this bandwagon. So they're trying to snatch up all of this material culture. And so it's a weird time now, because before it was very difficult to be able to get them to care. So here I was collecting this material culture, searching for it. And they were kind of like, oh, okay, well, do you have anything related to the stuff we want? And I would use their stuff as leverage. I was like, yeah, I'll loan you that candlestick belonging to a certain aristocrat. And this is just an example.
Yeah.
If you put this on display as well. Now I don't have to do that. Now they call me begging for pieces. And it's a weird thing. But this began with, I heard that I had an ancestor who had a portrait made. And I looked everywhere for it. I wanted to find it desperately. I knew that a branch of the family had gone to Tampico, Mexico, had ended up in Matamoros and Veracruz. In fact, tomorrow they're going to be filming me for a documentary that's talking about Creoles of color who went over to Matamoros and all of this, and who went to Tampico. And
so this is in Mexico.
This is in Mexico. Yeah. Creoles again.
Wow.
Yeah, we're talking about early on. I mean, in the late 1800s for sure, in 1820s and 30s, we see migrations of these people leaving for better opportunities.
Okay.
In short, so I went out looking for this one painting of an ancestor, and I found out there were actually 3 paintings of this guy. One of them had ended up in Mexico. It's now back. One was in a basement in California. It's now at the Ogden Museum. I own it, but it's on loan. And the other was destroyed in a fire, unfortunately, in the 1970s. But so in looking for proof of my own family's history and all of this, I was able to begin collecting and learning through collecting even things like this. And so I became aware of, like, even the connection of cigars. I had no idea about that. I liked cigars, but now it makes sense. Maybe it's cultural memory. It's maybe because my family liked cigars because they were involved in some ways in this industry.
It's in your blood.
It's in my blood. My
That's awesome.
Ancestor, a lady named Marie Therese Coin, born enslaved, was able to secure a Spanish grant to grow tobacco. And she grew tobacco. I'd say successfully because she wasn't hugely successful in the growing of tobacco in Natchitoches, but she was able to turn over a crop and she was able to sell it.
Wow.
And so I find that fascinating because no one told me that. Grandma didn't tell me that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's crazy. That's awesome. Yeah, and it's just, discovering that those family historical stories. I mean, it's really intriguing.
And I want to inspire others to discover their family history, and that's what I'm trying to do here. I think it's easier to get into this. I've always been someone who needed proof. So this material culture, when you look at a painting and you're face to face with history, I think it's inspiring. I think people are like, this is real. Yeah. Okay. It's not in a book. It's not in black and white. It's real. It's right there.
Yeah.
So I think that for our generation, especially, we're visual and we're very, we need it there.
So you discussed your social media presence, its impact.
Mm-hmm.
You've discovered some information about art through Instagram, or like how can you kind of expand on that? Like how Instagram's helped you?
So I have about 29,000 followers on Instagram. But even when I had less followers on Instagram, I'd have people just say, "Hey, Jeremy, what do you think about this? I saw this in a antique shop in Houston. You should go check it out." So I began to inspire people to look for these items, and occasionally they would tell me where to look, but also I was able to connect with people. Yeah. So even through social media, recently I've reconnected with cousins who disappeared in the 1880s and 1890s from Louisiana, crossed the color line, so to speak, and have reached back out because of my presence on social media. Also, because of my presence on social media, I've had the opportunities to consult with institutions and museums and help them facilitate ways to obtain pieces of material culture ethically, okay, and with the right narrative, because there's a lot of in the past what I would say was looting and taking of important pieces from people of color, and also a bunch of other whatever. So that's some social media has just really opened the doors. The internet, in general, has opened the doors in our eyes, maybe sometimes too wide. Yeah. But that's why we smoke the cigars.
That's right.
And drink the whiskey. It lowers it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a guest you were talking about family records, or at least in Louisiana. There's a guest I want to have on. His name's Sid Gray. I don't know if you've heard the name. I think I've mentioned him to you.
He's a historical architect. Yeah. And he's a hero.
So you know Sid?
I have never met that guy, but I respect him because I know he has saved so many important buildings. Right. There's one on Highland Road that he saved, the Petit Pierre house. That is like my favorite house in the world. And he's awesome.
Yeah, he's literally moved buildings.
Yeah.
And
to save them.
Yeah. So I want to get him on the show. Yeah. But I remember him telling me that, fortunately for Louisiana, the Spanish were master record keepers, and I guess that also makes sense with the Catholic Church, that they were able to just maintain all these records. So it might be easier for people to, if they're looking for their ancestors in Louisiana, they might have a leg up.
Right, and even people of African descent, it's harder, okay, because their ancestors. Many of them were most of them were enslaved, and so the only records a lot of times you have is an estate inventory or a sale. So you don't have them suing their mother or their brother like everyone else has, or you don't have them getting into this sort of trouble and a mention here or there. But there are people. There's a wonderful historian and genealogist named Yael Gordon who does this. Who is telling these stories and will help you find your ancestors, especially if you're in Louisiana, because of that connection you were saying. Spanish got a bad rep. I mean, everybody wants to talk about their lazy this and this in Louisiana. The Spanish were a little laissez-faire, but they were not. They were good at what they were doing. They were the better of the evils because they did not believe slavery was a permanent condition. And when I say that, they allowed for coartation, which was a way for enslaved people to get an independent appraisal of their value and to work and pay a third party. It doesn't matter if their master said, no, I want $10,000 for you. It doesn't matter. This guy says, if I pay $800 and he's going to hold the money, then I'm free. So the Spanish implemented things like that. They did not see slavery as a permanent condition. They were still enslavers, by the way. Let's not soften this totally. Okay, but they did not see slavery as a permanent condition, and it was better under the Spanish, and we see the population of free people flourish under them. And, of course, there's records in Cuba today, okay, because the High Court was in Cuba, pertaining to Louisiana and pertaining to my ancestors and everything else. And I've even heard some cousins reference records in Cuba of where we were able to find out information.
Wow.
So still a connection.
So those records are still in Cuba, some of those?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully.
Now we don't know with the state of affairs there.
Yeah. I mean, if they're not mildewed. Yeah, but I think they're still there. There are definitely still records pertaining to Louisiana's dealings in Cuba.
Wow.
Yep.
So what advice would you give to someone if they want to enter the art world space of collecting?
Stay away from this world.
Yeah.
Don't get. No, I'm kidding. I think it depends what you're after, and it depends what you're trying to do. I mean, I have a very specialized interest. I mean, my focus is really 19th century, 18th century portraiture.
Okay.
That is to say, paintings of people, oil on canvas. That's very specific. And then when we get into Southern or Louisiana, that's even more specific. Very niche. There's 20 people, and only about 18 of them like me. In this thing, but that's a pretty good number considering. Okay, so don't all right, but honestly, the number is growing because of, like I said, because of people's interest now in representation. But I would recommend people become educated, educate themselves. Don't be intimidated by PhDs. These people in the museum world, there's some very helpful people. There's some great resources. Historic New Orleans Collection is a great resource.
Yeah, they really are. They helped me on that article.
Good people there. They care. That matters.
Mm-hmm.
And we have other institutions in this state who also matter, or who also are helpful. They have some good people at the Louisiana State Museum, still a great registrar there, and staff members. But I would just tell people, don't be intimidated. Do your own research. And just because an expert says you're wrong doesn't mean you're wrong. Because I can tell you, if I could go back and tell myself, I'd be like, dude, just walk around a little cocky, keep your head up, and eventually it'll shake out. Because I've been told I've been wrong a lot of times before I was told, shit, man, you were right. So I think that's the game with anything, though. Walk around with a little confidence, but always know that every day is a chance to learn more, and you don't know everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, good advice.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So going back to the cigar, what are your thoughts on this blend?
Yeah, I really like this cigar, and it may just be the conversation and the setting, but it's very mellow, but it also has plenty of flavor for me. I like medium to full-bodied cigars. When I smoke cigars every day, I had a much more diversified palate.
Yeah.
But now that I don't smoke as many cigars, I kind of want the wow factor every time. This matches that. This has a wow factor to it. But and sometimes I think that's what we talk about. Like I'm like, oh, y'all give me this. Oh, check this, try this, try this. And unfortunately, I don't think my palate is as impressed by subtlety anymore because I don't smoke as many. So it's like if you've been eating like vegetables, you want something ridiculous, steak, potato, over the top. I want dessert, and I feel like every time I want a cigar, I want to feast.
Yeah.
But this is a beautiful smoke, and I'd smoke another one of these, no problem. And it's got plenty of flavor. It's not too harsh. It draws nicely. I like it.
What are some of your favorite drinks to pair with a cigar, alcohol or non-alcohol?
As far as drinks, I will drink a regular Coca-Cola. I don't drink soft drinks outside of really a cigar. I don't drink any soft drinks. I drink a lot of water. I don't mind a nice scotch. I prefer scotch to bourbon. I know everybody is on the bourbon bandwagon, and I agree. Some of it's killer. It's awesome. Pappy Van Winkle was awesome when it was $60. It's not so cool now that it's $2,500. It's still good. I mean, but it's not. I haven't found anything that's $2,500 tasting good. But but I mean, I get it. But so I like scotch, man. I'm not that sophisticated when it comes to that. I don't believe. I mean, I like Macallan, and I like a Macallan 12, and I like a Macallan 18, and I like a Glenmorangie. Sometimes some of the more exotic port cask or something like that. I find that interesting, but I tend to go more towards Highland scotches.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. What about your favorite cigar size? Do you have one?
I don't think so. And I think when I smoked more, depending on what I was doing or the time, I would tend to favor one or not. But now it's kind of like now that when I'm lucky, because I have a wife now and all these responsibilities, I might get a cigar once every 2 weeks. Whatever the guys at Habana Port tell me is what I go with.
Yeah.
And they haven't disappointed really. So it's
good.
So
I appreciate that. So we're getting near the end of our interview here, or conversation really. So I'm trying to do something new, like a regular segment. So we'll call it the final puff. 3 questions, rapid fire. Number 1, Tabasco or Crystal?
Ooh.
And you can take time.
Tabasco.
Tabasco, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Favorite vacation destination?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't know if I have one, man.
Okay.
I mean, now I have a kid, so it's like Disney World because there's enough to do for adults and children.
Yeah.
So I hate to say, but it's got a lot going on. So I'll say Disney.
Fair enough. The ideal person you would want to smoke a cigar with, alive or deceased?
Oh, God.
Yeah, if you could smoke a cigar with anyone, who would it be?
You put me on the spot. I can't even. I would. Well, that's terrible. It would. fortunately, he had like some sort of complicated cancer. I think Val Kilmer is awesome, and I love his.
Yeah.
But if he was still smoking cigars or something like that, I would love to just sit down and talk Val Kilmer. And also, just on a completely different side of the spectrum, I would like to just listen to John Mayer tell me about his misadventures with women while I drink and smoke cigars. And I don't even have to talk. He would. He don't have to bring a guitar or nothing. He just start, man.
Oh man.
And I would just watch. I was like, and what about Jessica Simpson? You know, there's some like, because I find him interesting. He's an interesting fella. He likes watches. I think he likes good scotch, or did at one time.
I wonder if he smokes cigars.
I don't know, but he should.
Yeah.
But he probably can't because, you know, he's a singer. And
yeah, there was that controversy with Nick. I think it was Nick Jonas when he was on the cover of Cigar Aficionado, because he's a big cigar guy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The Jonas Brothers, right? I think it was Nick. So when they featured him on the cover, like all his fan base went in a fury. They're like, "Oh, well, you shouldn't be doing this. It's bad for you, this and that." And I was like, "Man, it's nothing wrong. It's not like a cigarette." So I bet you're right. Like there are probably some high-profile individuals that are closet cigar smokers, but they're afraid of like revealing that for fear of, I don't know, some
sort of stigma with cigars. You know.
But I love the people who are high-profile, like Steve Harvey. Yeah. He's very pro cigar. Michael Jordan, like they don't hide that.
I would smoke a cigar with Steve. I mean, I smoke a cigar with almost any of these guys who like cigars. But I was trying to think of somebody a little out the box. John Mayer would be out the box.
Yeah, that sounds pretty.
And
fun.
Val Kilmer is just kind of wild and crazy. And I think he would be a cool guy to just smoke a cigar. Unfortunately, I don't think he would be able to do it. But you understand what I'm saying.
Right.
So.
Well, cool, man. Well, is there anything you want to impart to us before we wrap it up?
No, I appreciate this. Y'all are one of my favorite cigar spots. Y'all are actually my favorite cigar spot. And y'all always have great cigars, and they're well cared for, which is more important sometimes, or as important, I should say.
Yeah.
Because I think the care of the cigar, you know, goes a lot into the enjoyment of the cigar. So I appreciate that.
No, thank you for the words. So, and thanks for coming out today. So we'd love to have you back, you know, in the future. So keep us posted.
Okay.
All right, buddy. Have a good night.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and entertaining. If you enjoyed this episode and want to discover more episodes, check us out at thelifepuro.com or any other major streaming platform. If you're interested about the cigars we smoked, you can visit us at shop.habanaport.com. Until the next cigar. Thank you.